One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them. But what if the ring found a different master? What if Gandalf the Grey claimed it when Frodo first offered it to him in the Shire? What if Galadriel's trembling hand closed around it in the gardens of Lothlorien? What if Saruman's ambition finally grasped what he desired most? Or worse, what if the Witch-king of Angmar reunited with the very power that made him immortal? Today, we're exploring the nightmare scenarios Tolkien himself feared to write. 4 of Middle-earth's mightiest beings, one corrupting force, and the fate of the world hanging in the balance. This is the story of what would happen if the greatest powers in Middle-earth became its greatest threat. Before we dive into each scenario, we need to understand why the One Ring is so devastating and why it affects different beings in different ways. The One Ring isn't just a magical artifact, it's a fragment of Sauron's own essence, his will, his ambition, and his desire for domination poured into gold. When Sauron forged it in the fires of Mount Doom, he transferred a massive portion of his native power into the ring, making it the most dangerous object in all of Arda. Think about what that means. Sauron, a Maya who once served under Auled the Smith in Valinor, corrupted by Morgoth and transformed into the Dark Lord, took his very being, his immortal spirit, and bound it into a physical object. The ring isn't just powerful, it's alive with Sauron's consciousness, his malice, his inexhaustible will to dominate. The ring doesn't just corrupt randomly, it amplifies what's already there. It takes your strengths, your desires, your deepest ambitions, and twists them into tyranny. If you're wise, it makes you cruel. If you're strong, it makes you merciless. If you're good, it transforms that goodness into something terrible, a dictator who believes they're saving the world, even as they enslave it. This is why Frodo, a simple hobbit with no great power or ambition, was the ideal ring-bearer. He had little the ring could amplify. His greatest strength was his humility, his simple desire for peace and comfort. The ring could work with that, slowly, over time, but it couldn't explode it into immediate tyranny, the way it would with a being of great power. But for beings of immense power, the ring becomes exponentially more dangerous. The greater the wielder, the greater the catastrophe. It's not addition, it's multiplication. A powerful being doesn't just become more powerful with the ring, they become an apocalypse. Now let's talk about our 4 candidates. Gandalf the Grey, one of the Istari, the wizards sent to Middle-earth. But he's not just a wizard, he's Olorin, a Maya, an angelic being who walked in Valinor before time began. His power is deliberately restrained, locked behind the mortal form of an old man. The ring would shatter those restraints. Galadriel, one of the oldest and mightiest elves still in Middle-earth. She's thousands of years old, survived the First Age, studied under the Valar themselves, and bears Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings. She has rejected the darkness before, but the temptation has never left her. Saruman the White, chief of the Istari, the most knowledgeable of the wizards, and an expert on ring lore. He's already studying Sauron's methods, already building armies, already compromised. For him, the ring wouldn't be corruption, it would be completion. The Witch-king of Angmar, the greatest of the 9 Nazgul, a once king of men who already wore one of the 9 rings for centuries. He's a wraith, a shadow bound to Sauron's will. But what happens when the slave touches the master's chain? Each of these beings represents a different kind of catastrophe. Let's explore them one by one. Imagine this. The Council of Elrond. Frodo offers the ring, and Gandalf, tired, worried, seeing the forces of darkness growing, reaches out and takes it. Just this once, just to keep it safe. The transformation wouldn't be immediate. Not like Gollum or Isildur. Gandalf's willpower is monumental, his spirit refined over millennia. But the change would be inevitable. the physical transformation. Within days, perhaps hours, Gandalf would begin to change. The grey robes would seem to brighten, not with the white of Saruman, but with something more radiant, more terrible. His eyes, once kind and twinkling with mischief, would burn with an inner fire, righteous, absolute, unyielding. His staff would crackle with power, no longer restrained. He would become, in his own words, beautiful and terrible as the dawn. The transformation wouldn't just be visual. Gandalf's very presence would become overwhelming. To stand before him would be to feel the weight of judgment, the crushing certainty of absolute righteousness. His voice would carry the compulsion of the ring, not the crude domination of Sauron, but something more subtle. When Gandalf spoke, you would want to obey. You would feel that disobedience wasn't just wrong, it was unthinkable. Remember, Gandalf is Olorin, a Maya who walked with the Valar before the world was made. His power was always there, locked behind the restrictions placed on the Istari. The wizards were sent to Middle-earth in mortal form, specifically to limit their power, to force them to guide rather than rule. The ring would shatter those restraints like kindling. But here's the horrifying part. Gandalf would still believe he was doing good. Gandalf's corruption wouldn't look like Sauron's. He wouldn't build a dark tower or breed orcs. Instead, he would become what he feared most, a tyrant dressed in virtue. He would use the ring's power to command armies, to compel obedience, to force peace upon Middle-earth. Think about what Gandalf values most: freedom, growth, the right of all peoples to choose their own path. These are the principles he fought for throughout the War of the Ring. But the ring would twist these values into their opposite, while convincing Gandalf they remained pure. Why should people be free to choose darkness? The ring would whisper. Why allow suffering when you have the power to prevent it? Why permit war when you can enforce peace? Rohan would kneel, not out of fear, but out of compulsion. The proud Rohirrim, who valued freedom above all else, would find themselves unable to resist. Gondor would serve, unable to resist the sheer, dominating will of a Maya wielding Sauron's power. Even the Shire would be protected, under his watchful, unblinking gaze. Every letter would be read, every conversation monitored, every potential threat eliminated before it could grow. Free will would become a memory. Freedom would be sacrificed for safety. And the worst part? Many would thank him for it. In the beginning at least, his rule would seem like salvation. No more war, no more suffering, no more difficult choices, just obedience and peace. In one of Tolkien's letters, Gandalf says that if he took the ring, he would become far worse than Sauron, because he would rule with the conviction that he was saving people. Sauron ruled through naked tyranny. Everyone knew he was evil. But Gandalf would rule through righteousness. How do you rebel against goodness? How do you fight someone who's only trying to help you? Imagine a world where every choice, every action, every thought is guided by an all-seeing, all-powerful, benevolent dictator who genuinely believes he's creating paradise while building a prison. Could he defeat Sauron? Yes, absolutely. Gandalf with the One Ring would be nearly unstoppable. He's a Maya, the same order of being as Sauron, but he possesses wisdom, strategic brilliance, and the loyalty of nearly every free people in Middle-earth. With the ring amplifying his power, he could command the elves, rally men, and march on Mordor with an army united not by hope, but by compulsion. Let's think about what this war would look like. Gandalf wouldn't need to sneak into Mordor or rely on a desperate gambit. He would march openly with the armies of the West behind him, not as allies, but as extensions of his will. The elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien would march at his command. The Ents would uproot themselves and stride to war. Even the eagles would descend, not out of friendship, but unable to resist. The battle would be cataclysmic. Two Maiar, two former servants of the Valar, clashing with powers that hadn't been unleashed in Middle-earth since the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. Barad-dûr would fall, the very foundations of Mordor would crack. Sauron, already diminished without the ring, would be annihilated, not just defeated, but unmade, his spirit scattered so thin it could never reform. But the victory would be Middle-earth's doom, because Gandalf wouldn't stop. He'd rebuild. He'd fix everything. The realms of men would be restructured under his guidance. The elves would be prevented from sailing west. "You're needed here," he would say, and they would be unable to refuse. And in his mercy, the world would suffocate. Every problem would have a solution. Every conflict would be resolved. Every tear would be wiped away. And everyone would lose the one thing that made them truly alive, the freedom to choose. Before we continue, quick favor. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Tolkien's lore, help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button and let's build a community of Middle-earth fanatics together. Now, let's talk about the Lady of Lothlorien. When Frodo offers Galadriel the ring in Lothlorien, she tells him exactly what would happen. In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen. Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn, treacherous as the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. This isn't speculation. This is prophecy. If Galadriel claimed the ring, the change would be immediate and magnificent. The Lady of Light would become the Empress of Dominion. Her beauty, already otherworldly, would become unbearable, so radiant that mortals couldn't look upon her without weeping. Her power, already immense with Nenya, would become godlike with the One Ring. Lothlorien would transform. The golden trees would spread like a conquering forest, engulfing Mirkwood, swallowing Fangorn, reaching across Middle-earth like roots strangling the land. Her realm wouldn't just be protected, it would be absolute. Galadriel's dominion would be seductive. Unlike Gandalf's overt compulsion or Sauron's brutal tyranny, Galadriel would rule through beauty and desire. People would want to serve her. They would worship her. They would burn down their own homes to build her temples. Think about what happened when the Fellowship entered Lothlorien. The light, the music, the sense of timeless peace. It was intoxicating. Gimli the dwarf, who came to Lorien with suspicion and ancient grudges against the elves, left utterly devoted to Galadriel. He didn't just respect her, he loved her, with a love that bordered on worship. And that was Galadriel without the ring, Galadriel deliberately restraining herself. Now imagine that power amplified 1,000-fold. Imagine that beauty, that presence, that overwhelming charisma, backed by the full might of the One Ring. She would be merciful, but her mercy would be conditional. Obey and live in paradise. Resist and face not cruelty, but absence. To be cast out from her light would be unbearable, a fate worse than death. Those who defied her wouldn't be executed. They would be exiled, sent away from her presence. And they would spend the rest of their lives yearning to return, broken by the memory of what they'd lost. The free peoples would flock to her. Men, elves, dwarves. All would bend the knee, not out of fear, but out of adoration. She would become what Sauron could never be, a Dark Lord loved by her subjects. Even the dwarves, who resisted the corruption of the Rings of Power through sheer stubbornness, would find themselves unable to resist her. Even the Ents, ancient and slow to decide, would find themselves drawn into her domain. The entire map of Middle-earth would be redrawn, not in red for conquest, but in gold for willing submission. Could she defeat Sauron? This is where it gets interesting. Galadriel is one of the oldest and mightiest elves in existence. She was born in Valinor before the Sun and Moon, studied under the Valar, and survived the wars of the First Age. With Nenya, she's already holding back the decay of time in Lothlorien. With the One Ring, she would become a power rivaling Sauron himself. But here's the catch. Sauron made the ring. He poured his essence into it. Even if Galadriel wielded it, she would be wielding his power, filtered through her own will. It would be like fighting fire with the arsonist's own torch. The war between them would devastate Middle-earth. Armies of elves and enslaved men would clash with Sauron's forces in battles that would make the War of the Ring look like a skirmish. Mountains would fall, rivers would run black. And in the end, even if Galadriel won, Sauron's essence in the ring would twist her beyond recognition. She would sit on a throne of crystal and gold, beautiful and terrible, loved and feared, victorious and damned. Now we come to the most plausible scenario, because Saruman was already trying to take the ring. Saruman the White, Curunir, the most learned of the Istari, had spent centuries studying Sauron's methods, obsessing over the rings of power, and building his own armies in Isengard. He wasn't fighting Sauron, he was competing with him. If Saruman actually got the ring, it wouldn't corrupt him, it would complete him. The moment Saruman claimed the ring, he would know. He would feel it, the rush of power, the connection to Sauron's will, the vast network of domination suddenly at his fingertips, and he would act immediately. Isengard would mobilize, the Uruk-hai would march, Rohan would burn, not as a side project, but as the first conquest in a campaign of total domination. Saruman wouldn't waste time with schemes or subtlety. He would strike fast and hard, consolidating power before Sauron could retaliate. Saruman versus Sauron. This would be the clash of two masters of the same dark art, but with a critical difference. Sauron made the ring, but Saruman would be wielding it. The question is whether the ring's inherent connection to Sauron would be a leash or a weapon. Tolkien suggests that even with the ring, a new wielder would need time to master it, to bend it fully to their will. The ring doesn't just grant power, it has to be claimed, wrestled into submission through sheer force of will. Sauron spent centuries binding the ring to himself. Saruman would be starting from scratch. But Saruman is no fool. He spent decades studying the ring, researching its properties, understanding its mechanisms. Of all the beings in Middle-earth, he's the most prepared to wield it. He wouldn't fumble with it like Boromir would have. He would know exactly how to use it, at least in theory. The problem? Saruman is brilliant, but he's also impatient and arrogant. He would challenge Sauron too soon, convinced he could master the ring faster than he actually could. And that premature challenge would lead to a war that would make the War of the Ring look like a border skirmish. Orthanc versus Barad-dûr, the Uruk-hai versus the Orcish legions, wizardry versus sorcery, fire and lightning and powers that would crack the earth. In this scenario, Middle-earth wouldn't have two Dark Lords, it would have one eventually. Either Saruman would master the ring and destroy Sauron, becoming the supreme tyrant, or Sauron would crush Saruman and reclaim the ring, emerging stronger than ever. There's no timeline where they coexist. The ring permits only one master. If Saruman won, his rule would be coldly efficient. No beauty, no seduction, no pretense of benevolence. Just order, industry, progress through domination. The Shire would be mechanized, its green fields replaced with mills and factories. Exactly what we saw in the Scouring of the Shire, but amplified across all of Middle-earth. Fangorn would be clear-cut, every tree logged and processed. The Ents would be hunted down and destroyed or enslaved. Gondor would become a factory, its white towers replaced with smokestacks, its people transformed into workers, serving the machine of Saruman's empire. He would rebuild Middle-earth in the image of Isengard, a place where nature is controlled, freedom is a liability, and rebellion is impossible. Every forest would be managed, every river dammed and diverted, every mountain quarried for resources. The whole world would become a garden of steel and smoke, ordered and efficient and utterly lifeless. Saruman wouldn't waste time with mercy or justice or fairness. These are inefficiencies. You obey because the alternative is elimination. You work because the alternative is starvation. You serve because there is no other option. He wouldn't be loved. He wouldn't even be feared in the way Sauron was feared. He would simply be an unchangeable fact of existence, like gravity or death. You can't rebel against Saruman any more than you can rebel against the turning of the seasons. And unlike Gandalf or Galadriel, Saruman wouldn't suffer from cognitive dissonance. He wouldn't believe he was doing good. He would simply believe he was doing what was necessary. And in his mind, that would be justification enough. This is the wildcard scenario, and potentially the most terrifying. The Witch-king of Angmar is not like the others. He's not a Maya or an elf or a wizard. He's a wraith, a once mortal man who wore one of the 9 rings for so long that his body dissolved and his will became enslaved to Sauron. He is, in essence, an extension of Sauron's power. But what happens when the slave touches the master's crown? 2 possibilities. Possibility 1, the perfect vessel. If the Witch-king claimed the One Ring, he might not become independent. Instead, he could become Sauron's ultimate servant, a wraith wielding the full power of the ring, acting as Sauron's avatar in the physical world. Sauron wouldn't need to retake the ring. The Witch-king would simply bring it to Barad-dûr, and in that reunion, Sauron would incarnate fully, unstoppable and unkillable. This is the nightmare scenario. The Dark Lord returned, the ring on his finger, the Wraith King as his general, and no force in Middle-earth strong enough to oppose them. Possibility 2, the broken chain. But there's another possibility. The Witch-king was once a king. He had ambition, pride, the will to rule. That's why he accepted a ring of power in the first place. If the One Ring's dominating will clash with Sauron's claim over him, it might break the connection. Think about what the Witch-king was before he became a wraith. He was one of the great kings of men during the Second Age, powerful enough that Sauron chose him specifically to receive one of the 9 rings. He wasn't just any mortal, he was exceptional. And somewhere, deep beneath millennia of servitude and spiritual dissolution, that original ambition might still exist, buried but not destroyed. The One Ring is the master of all the rings of power. It commands the 9. So what happens when the slave picks up the chain? Does the chain bind him tighter, or does it become a weapon he can turn against his former master? Imagine the Witch-king suddenly freed from Sauron's leash, still a wraith, still immortal, but now wielding the ring for himself. He would be weaker than Gandalf or Galadriel. He lacks their inherent power, their wisdom, their spiritual strength. But he would be relentless. Wraiths don't tire, they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't doubt. The Witch-king with the ring would be an unstoppable force of pure, focused will. He wouldn't need to rest or recover. He would simply advance, day after day, night after night, until everything before him was subjugated or destroyed. He could command the dead, raise armies of wraiths, and march on both Mordor and Minas Tirith with equal hatred. He would remember his enslavement to Sauron, and his revenge would be absolute. He would remember his ancient pride as a king of men, and his desire to reclaim that glory would drive him to conquer everything in his path. This scenario wouldn't end with one Dark Lord. It would end with a fractured, burning Middle-earth, caught between 2 Wraith Lords, tearing the world apart. And neither would stop until the other was utterly destroyed. Let's rank them. The Witch-king, least dangerous. Why? Because he's either Sauron's puppet or a weaker, more predictable tyrant. He lacks the cunning of Saruman, the wisdom of Gandalf, or the charisma of Galadriel. He's terrifying, yes, but he's ultimately limited by his nature as a wraith. He can be fought, he can be stopped. Barely. Saruman, dangerous but beatable. Saruman with the ring would be brutal, efficient, and methodical, but he's also arrogant, impatient, and prone to underestimating his enemies. He would challenge Sauron too soon and make enemies too quickly. His rule would be oppressive but fragile. A united resistance, Gondor, Rohan, the elves, could potentially bring him down before he consolidated power. Gandalf, terrifyingly dangerous. This is where it gets hard. Gandalf with the ring would be nearly impossible to resist, because he wouldn't seem evil, he would seem right. His tyranny would be dressed in mercy, his domination would feel like salvation. By the time people realized they'd lost their freedom, it would be too late. He would be a Maya, wielding the power of Sauron, with the wisdom of ages and the loyalty of the free peoples. Stopping him would require rejecting goodness itself. Galadriel, the most dangerous. Galadriel is the worst-case scenario. Why? Because she would be loved. Her rule wouldn't feel like oppression, it would feel like paradise. People wouldn't resist her, they would worship her. She combines immense power, ancient wisdom, charisma beyond measure, and the seductive beauty of the Eldar. She would be a dark lord who inspired devotion, not fear. And that makes her the most insidious, the most inescapable, the most terrible of all. Sauron ruled through fear. Galadriel would rule through love, and that's infinitely more dangerous. So there you have it, 4 paths to ruin, 4 ways the world could end, not with a bang, but with a choice. This is why the ring had to be destroyed, not wielded by the wise, not claimed by the strong, not even touched by the good. Because power, absolute power, corrupts absolutely. And in Middle-earth, some evils cannot be defeated, they can only be unmade. And one more thing before you go, if you made it this far, you're clearly a true fan of Tolkien's world. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers, so we can keep diving deep into the lore, the languages, and the legends of Middle-earth. One channel to bring them all, and in the algorithm, bind them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, may your journey be free of ring wraiths, your path lit by Arundel's star, and your choices wiser than Isildur's.